We are now live. Let's see.
Hello, hello.
Okay, hello, everybody. Welcome. I am going to go ahead and share my screen here. Oops, hold on. Ooh. Share my screen. I'm gonna want this. I think this is what I want. Alrighty, can I present here? Yeah. Does this look good to everybody? Okay, it looks good on my end, but hopefully it looks normal. All right, well, welcome everybody. We're gonna give you all a couple minutes to log on and get settled, but I wanna welcome you all to this afternoon session. This is day one of our Tech Week conference series. We're so excited to have you all join us today. And this afternoon, we will be having a lovely panel discussion on using AI for good. We have some really great speakers that we will introduce in a couple moments here. Give everybody just a couple minutes to get logged on. My name is Carrie Fleming. I am on the local marketing team in Boston. So if you all would like to get comfortable using that chat, let us know where you're tuning in from. If you're also in the Boston area, shout out to you guys. I believe John and Laura are also in the Boston area. We'll just go ahead and see. Where is the chat? There we go. Got some Colorado, Toronto.
Fort Collins, San Francisco.
Sweet, Florida. Awesome, people from all over.
While you guys are dropping in your locations, let us know what brought you to the session today. Are you, what types of roles are you guys at in your company? Are you data scientists? Are you product people, designers, something else? Share with us.
Yeah, let's see.
Oh, back-to-back UX designers.
Yeah,
all
look
right.
At that. Love it.
Awesome.
More. Awesome. Sweet.
Desmond, I'm some would call me an entrepreneur, but I'm still working on that too, man.
Work in progress always. If you all want to make sure also that you have your comments set to panelists and attendees so everybody can see what you all are saying, not just to us. We want everybody to be clued in. Alrighty.
Got a good range here. Oh, cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Oh, Bill, specifically about accessibility and AI fairness. That is definitely going to be some of the stuff we're discussing today. And obviously a huge topic in the world. Obviously it was just announced a couple days ago that Google fired their head of AI ethics only a couple months after firing another AI ethics researcher. So there's some big questions about this going on, and it's very much in the business sector's minds.
Yeah. All right, lovely, lovely. All right, well, I am going to go ahead and get right into this. Welcome all again to our Using AI for Good event this afternoon. We have some really great speakers. I don't know why this isn't changing. Oh, here we go. Okay, so today joining us, we have Dan Huss. He is going to be moderating this discussion. And then we are also joined by John, Laura, and Marlaina. So happy to have them all here with us today. We're so incredibly grateful that they're taking times out of their day to speak with you all and share their insights. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our amazing partners. We are so grateful for each and every one of them for really lending a hand in getting the word out. We could not do this whole series without all of their help. So we are so thankful for all of them. So special thanks to all of our amazing partners. A little bit about General Assembly, just for anybody who may not be well-versed in exactly what we do. but we are a global education company and we specialize in some of today's most in-demand skills within the tech industry. So coding, data, design, marketing, business, career development, all things that we touch on. We have both part-time and full-time courses in all of these topics, as well as single instance workshops and boot camps. And on top of all of that, we have free events and conference series such as this one. So I absolutely encourage you all to take a look at all of the upcoming programming that we have going on for the rest of the week. Definitely RSVP where you can. We have some great topics, some great speakers, and it's all free. So you have absolutely everything to gain and nothing to lose. So a couple more notes before we get into this. Definitely use that Q&A for questions in the chat for general commentary. We like to try and keep questions and comments separated as best as we can, just so when we do come to the Q&A section of this event, we're able to access those easily. But definitely, if you want to make a comment, we'd love to see what you have to say. Just use that chat box. This event will be recorded and transcribed, so you guys don't have to worry about having Wi-Fi issues if you have to log off a little early. Don't worry, you will get the recording and any resources shared in a follow-up email next week. And lastly, we definitely would love to see what you guys have to say. So share your experience with us on social media. Definitely use that hashtag #HitPlay. We would love to keep you guys engaged within our community and get you guys involved wherever we can. So quick thank you again to all of you guys for joining us, and a huge, huge thank you to all of our amazing speakers. We're so lucky to have you guys here with us today. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Dan to get this started.
Thank you, Carrie. I am so excited to be here. I should warn all of you that some excitement sometimes translates into loudness. So headphone warning in advance. As Carrie mentioned, I'm going to be our moderator for today. Just a little bit about myself. I am the CEO and founder of a company called Gravyty AI, which is a dual-sided marketplace for data science technologies. I have a background in product management myself. I've spent my life building data science heavy products as an adult. My last job was with State Street. Prior to that, I was a lead product manager with Boston Consulting Group's digital ventures team. I am joined here by just some absolutely stunning panelists who I cannot wait to have introduce themselves. Laura, you are the founder and CEO of Reboot RX. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and about the company?
Sure. So my background is actually as a cancer researcher, not in AI or data science, but I'm still here today. And thank you for having me anyway. So I lead a tech nonprofit, and we are using AI to repurpose generic drugs for the treatment of cancer.
That's incredible.
Do you want more details than that, or is that good for now?
That's good for now.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll get into it. Awesome. I'm also joined here by John, who is a senior machine learning engineer at another company called Gravyty, not to be confused with my company, Gravyty AI. We had a fun conversation about that before we kicked this thing off. There's lots of Gravyty companies out there. John, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your Gravyty.
Yeah, so as you all may have seen, my Gravyty company is spelled Gravyty. So that's one way to distinguish a little bit. But we help nonprofits and other fundraising organizations, hospitals, higher education institutions, food banks, etc., to fundraise more effectively using tools. One of our big products essentially helps to draft first drafts of emails that the fundraisers can change in whatever way they want and then send to their donors. And we sort of continuously update the way that we generate those based on what the fundraisers are sending over time, based on their linguistic styles and whatever language they tend to use, so that they can spend more time doing meaningful engagement and less time sort of reconstructing emails for each individual donor.
Super rad. I bet not the purpose of this talk, but at some point I'd love to hear about all the models that you guys have making that work.
Absolutely.
And last but certainly not least, Marlaina from she's an IT project management consultant with Boom Labs, which is I think it's a division of ThreeBridge Solutions. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Daniel said, my name is Marlaina Love. I am currently based here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I am an IT project manager consultant with Boom Lab. It is a talent development program for junior consultants under ThreeBridge Solutions who have recently graduated from college and wanting to grow their career in tech through the form of projects. Since then, I'm representing two amazing organizations in technology. One is Blacks in Technology, which is assisting Black professionals seeking to start or advance their career in technology. And for my AI enthusiasts out there, I am the founder and president for the Minnesota Artificial Intelligence Network, which is a growing community of 1,400 plus AI enthusiasts who are looking to start or advance their career in artificial intelligence. And I have to add, I was the person who was looking to start a career in AI about 2 years ago. And so we network, we have forums, we offer workshops and classes for those who are looking for the skills, who are looking for incitement and just really wanting to grow in that community.
Awesome. Oh, this is going to be incredible. Thank you all for sharing a little bit about yourselves. We've been throwing around the term AI as, in the title of this session. We've been talking about, John, I introduced you as a machine learning engineer. I'd love to hear a little bit, and I'll, for the purpose of moderation, I'll just go through the order of people that are on my screen individually. What does AI mean to you? I think that, AI right now, as we talk about it, our industry has a nomenclature problem because depending on who you talk to, that can mean so many different things. Laura, you are in my upper left corner. What has been your experience with that? Would you say that's accurate? It's tough to describe.
For me, I think about any form of computational tools that we might use to make sense of a lot of data. For us, we're talking about biomedical data and generate predictions faster. So in my mind, AI just falls into the bucket of data science, computational biology, any way to decrease the amount of manual effort that's needed by scientists to make sense of data and generate predictions. So I'm going to go with that.
Awesome. Marlaina?
Absolutely. I take the simple approach because I actually have a lot of people who tend to not understand technology, let alone artificial intelligence. So for me, I look at AI as a new ever-evolving technology for organizations and everyday people to leverage for scalability, meaning that if you can leverage a computer program or a robot to do tasks that are simply done by humans. And it's all about having convenience and your time back so that you can increase productivity and make better informed decisions.
Awesome. From Laura, I'm hearing about predictability and being able to predict the future in terms of cancer and new drugs. Marlaina's, your definition is more around time saving, automation. All of those definitely combine to form what we think of AI. John, how about you? How would you describe it?
Yeah, great question. So kind of piggybacking a little bit on Marlaina's definition, I would define it sort of as, the use of any sort of program that essentially accomplishes a task that we would typically think of as something requiring human intelligence. So it's a very subjective definition there. And then I would say secondarily, it's also often used as a marketing term, sometimes simultaneously along with that sort of subjective technical definition, sometimes separately. And I would also point out, given that, my role as a machine learning engineer, I kind of view it as really not a sort of one-to-one correspondence with machine learning. You could have AI without machine learning, arguably, and vice versa.
That's great. Yeah, very good points on the marketing language. There's an old saying, as a startup founder, when talking to an investor, you use the term AI. When talking to an executive, you use the term machine learning. When you talk to someone who knows what they're doing, it's just a simple statistical program. That's the running joke. John, I want to just dig in very quickly. What do I would agree with you that machine learning and AI are not always synonymous with each other. How would you separate those two out?
Yeah, great question. So an example of when you might have AI without machine learning would be, maybe if you're doing a particularly sort of trivial task and, maybe you just aren't using an algorithm that's traditionally viewed as a machine learning algorithm, whether you've sort of developed your own programming system, any typical developer, maybe a backend developer, will be writing different algorithms to do things all the time. Sometimes those would be things that we would kind of consider human tasks. An example of, maybe machine learning without AI is if we're sort of just doing some analytics, we might just run a linear regression on something, and you could argue that that is AI as well. It's a very kind of loose term, but you could also argue that we're just, doing a basic machine learning algorithm and not actually putting it into production, not actually applying it to a human task, but just using it to gather some information there.
Yep.
And then I would also say, as a machine learning engineer, part of typically what you do is really back-end web development a lot of the time.
Awesome. Yeah, there's definitely difficulty in distinguishing them all. We totally have that nomenclature problem. It comes up for me quite frequently, when we talk about AI, data science, algorithm, model, so many different words. Along those lines, and I'm going to open it up to whoever would like to kind of answer this one first. Feel free to just pop off mute. What are some of the things that you wish that, whether it's business executives or just, an individual who's trying to learn about AI, what do you wish that people knew more about AI or maybe data science more broadly?
I can jump in first.
Jump in, Laura.
There seems to be this thinking that AI can solve everything. And what that is definitely not true. And from our experience, at least, you need to build your AI for a very specific use case and train it for that use case.
Yeah, so the idea that you can have, if you just throw some AI at it, it's going to solve a big problem. I hear that a lot from business executives. It's kind of that next shiny object syndrome. They hear the AI term and they're like, just build some AI into it. Yeah, it's going to be great. Anything to add, Marlaina or John?
I would say kind of the first thing that came to mind was really along those same lines, and just to kind of elaborate a little bit on my thinking, when a task has been done before and we have an algorithm and all you have to do is maybe call an API or install a package, we have existing an existing model for a task, it's often somewhat predictable how that will perform. Even then, not always. But if we need to do a little bit of research and experimentation, it's often very unpredictable how it will perform. And we could dive into a huge, long conversation about ethics in AI around, if we are doing research, how do we analyze the results? How do we look at, the different biases in there? So there's really a lot to unpack in there.
John, we're going to be diving directly into some of those questions. Absolutely. Marlaina.
Yeah, I definitely agree with John and Laura. It's like AI is this big magician. It makes all the problems go away, but that's not the case. If you're not doing AI, then you're definitely doing analytics. One thing that I've learned in my journey and what I tell a lot of executives is that before you can think about AI, you really have to think about what is the problem you're trying to solve and what do you want that outcome to be. then you will know, like, is AI the right tool, or is it simply data or business intelligence? That's definitely the one thing about that. And because I'm in project management, it seems that the words project management, change, automation, it's scary. It's like, are you taking my job away? Like, what are you doing now? And that's really not the case when it comes to AI. Yes, it's true. A percentage of companies are planning of using AI-based systems to fill roles. However, AI is most likely to create, and it's allowing humans to free up time so they can focus on design and the development of new products. And I always like to use the example of AI imaging in healthcare with the radiologist. Having a simple chest X-ray application that can detect diseases faster is very useful tool to leverage, while you having a machine that does all the complex work. There's more time to focus on making more accurate decisions via predictions, classification, and clustering.
Yeah, totally. I think that the concern around AI, taking jobs, it definitely has some real aspects to it. There are some sectors that are going to be impacted more than others. But as you mentioned, it is also going to create a lot of jobs. I mean, the sheer fact that I think one of the fastest growing professions in the world right now is machine learning engineer or data scientist is a testament to that. And they're probably not going to be automating themselves out of a job anytime soon, even with the things like AutoML that are coming out. Fantastic. I do think that there are a lot of different types of misconceptions that are out there around this. And I wish we had time to get into all of them. But we specifically, as John was mentioning about, need to dive into a little bit of the concerns that we have with AI. There's some anxiety beyond the idea that it is potentially going to steal our jobs, but I think there's a more pressing concern in much more the immediate future, and that's kind of some of what John was getting into, which is around bias. Laura, I'd like to start with you, especially given some of the implications of data and in the healthcare space. What do you think are some of those fears in the healthcare space around, the use of data science?
Well, in the healthcare space, the decisions that are made or the output of the AI could directly impact how a patient is treated. So obviously, there's a serious concern there. In our work, it's really a prediction that then will always be tested clinically, for example, through a clinical trial. So in that sense, it's really just helping us get to a prediction faster and will always be tested experimentally or clinically.
Can you walk us through maybe some of the nitty gritty of, what would result in a potentially bad outcome? How could that happen? That obviously you're testing before it's ever going to be put to use. Let's say you find something that does have a bad outcome. What is a bad outcome and how might that happen?
So in our work, I know we haven't actually gone into details much about what we do in our companies, but in our work, we are trying to use AI to prioritize which drugs might provide the greatest benefit to cancer patients. It's a tool for prioritization by being able to sift through a lot of data on these drugs. So a lot of data already exists on these drugs, and it's helping us predict which should be tested in the last stage of development. So it's unlikely that when that drug is given to a large population of cancer patients that it'll cause harm because of all the existing evidence. It may not provide significant benefit, though. Also, because we're working with drugs that have been used by people for decades, there are fewer safety concerns. But that doesn't necessarily translate to other applications of AI. I'm just talking about how we're using it. So I think in our use case, there might be less of a concern with others.
Got it. the risk. So you're using enormous amounts of data to sift through volumes of data that no human would be able to actually go through to locate the best potential drugs to serve their needs. And in their case, because these are existing drugs that have already passed clinical trials, the worst case scenario is that maybe that drug doesn't perform as well for them, but it's still going to be a safe and effective drug. It's not like you're creating AI generated drugs from nothing. You're using the foundation. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and in any clinical test or a clinical trial, a drug may fail, may not be found to be effective, and it's an experiment. Any clinical trial is an experiment, so it's not really that different from where you would be without the use of AI, I would say.
Got it. John, I want to send that same question to you, and then Marlaina on deck coming up is I want to ask about maybe whose responsibility is it to start being either regulating AI or thinking through the ethics as you build products. But before we get into that, John, can you talk us through a little bit about what types of bias we see, what things we should watch out for? Where does the fear and anxiety around use of AI come from today?
Yeah, so some of the biases, of course, we know about, and a lot of them come from just biases in the data. If we're training a model on biased data, then garbage in, garbage out. Some of it is as simple as that. And then, some of it we're not able to necessarily see as clearly. We may not know about all the biases in the data, even if we are actively looking for them. And so, that's kind of a big challenge across the board. And there are efforts to mitigate that. But at the end of the day, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be a simple task for sure.
No, not at all.
And, going very related to this, going into like some of the misconceptions about AI are, number one, that it's all a black box. We don't know what's going on in there, that it's not interpretable. And number two, that it's not a black box, that it is very interpretable. We know why we're getting the answers we're getting. And I think both of those, well, neither of those are really universally true, depending, both on the data and the types of algorithms that we're using. Particularly neural nets are often black boxes, although we can sometimes analyze the sort of outputs to see why we might be getting different results. Other sorts of algorithms might be more interpretable and they might not.
Awesome. Yeah, two big things kind of in that world to unpack. The first one, as you mentioned, is if there's bias in the training data, that's going to create bias in the model itself that's being generated. And the second thing that you brought up is this concept of interpretability. So, which they are somewhat related. The interpretability is the ability for a human to go in and say, after an AI, we'll just use the term AI, makes a decision about something or predicts something, for a human to come in and say, well, why did it do that? A great example of non-interpretable AI was some of the chess playing AI that's been generated. Some of the chess players that it went up against said that it felt like playing an alien. It's making so many calculations, and it's thinking in a way that we just don't comprehend, that if you ask, there's no way to understand why the AI moved that pawn from this position to this position. Now, in chess, that might not necessarily raise some concerns, but if an AI is making predictions about who to give a loan to, and we can't understand why it made that decision, there might be some issues there. John, last bit before we move on, what I hear the terms bias in data a lot, but what does that actually in practicality mean? What are we looking for when we're looking for bias in data?
That's kind of a tough question to answer. It depends what kind of bias we're looking for, or if we're just looking for, bias in general. I would say essentially data that's not representative. I find it hugely beneficial to think of a lot of these things in terms of probability distributions. So, anyone who's, taken kind of an intro to statistics class may know a little bit what I'm talking about. But at the end of the day, if we're talking about, racial bias, if all of our data, if, we're dealing with medical data and, it's disproportionately trained on white people's data, much more so than what we're actually seeing in the real world, then that's clearly going to be problematic, because different medications, different conditions, different cultural factors all influence, the outcomes of basically anything we're trying to predict.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a very real example of where that took place was someone was training a facial recognition, piece of AI, and even just to unlock our faces. And the engineers building this were probably mostly just white males. So after they built this, the set of data that they used, while it had some diversity in it, was more largely focused on white males. So the facial recognition did a less good job at recognizing female faces, and particularly for people of color, because the data didn't have it in it. So that's a great example.
And just to add one more thing on top of that, even if the data is representation, representative of sort of what we're seeing, if we have biases in society, surprise, surprise, then even if we're collecting our data, representatively, we're still incorporating biases. So this really is tightly related to this question that has been talked about a lot of, equity versus equality. So I'd encourage everyone to kind of really engage with that question, especially when thinking about AI.
If you train an AI based off of Twitter language, you're going to end up with a Nazi, terrible AI. And that's exactly what happened. I forget the name of that AI bot that was developed. But so on that, Marlaina, what, you get to, in your role, you get to see lots of different types of projects and, implementations that are using AI. Whose responsibility is it to be thinking as you are building products or using projects that use AI? Whose responsibility is it in that process to think through those ethics? And should we be thinking about how to regulate this?
Yeah, I definitely agree to that. I think it's the responsibility for everyone. It's everyone's responsibility, from the data scientist to the technology leader to the project manager, reinforcing it and having compliance, regulatory, and all the standards and processes that needs to be followed. And because AI is not necessarily new, but for companies it's new, and for data scientists who are new in their role, it's evolving and it's new technology, and you're learning. Things that we learned this year is completely different from next year. So there's always an update to how we should manage or implement the project. And so I definitely think that we should have more compliance and we should have more policies. I look at the example of the Project Management Institute. They have like the PMBOK, which is the Project Management Book of Knowledge, that teach technology leaders, non-technology leaders, how a project should be run. And it's all about, are you delivering a quality product that is economically safe, convenient, and it's better for humanity? And is it reaching those goals? And do we have the criteria for success? And so when you're talking about bias, That is a big thing. And with social media, one mishap could cost you your company, could cost you your job and your algorithm. And we have to remember the phrase that data is only as good as your data scientist. And so having them understand that how you're training your model, whether it's intentional or unintentional, you have to remember to be inclusive. You have to think about all those things. And a data scientist can't do that all by themselves. That's why you have to involve the market that you're delivering a product to. You have to involve your regulators. You have to involve your industry experts, your technology leaders who are known in this area to make sure that you're implementing the best product ever. And on top of that, even if you do all that, there's still more. There's still gaps. There's still issues, and you're still growing and implementing those changes. And so even when it comes to technology, there's always a release that has to be done. There's always improvement that has to be done, and more data that needs to be cleansed and implemented into your model.
Awesome. I'll love to open that up to Laura or John. Anything to add around responsibility in ethics? And then we'll get off of the darker side of worrying about AI and into kind of what you guys are all doing on the better side of it. What do you think? Any other thoughts on responsibility?
Yeah, I just love the point of thinking about how we define the criteria. I kind of emphasize, or excuse me, the criteria for sort of judging our models. I kind of emphasize bias in the data. But of course, even if we eliminate bias in the data, if the way we're measuring sort of the quality and efficacy of our models is biased, if we're having people determine that criteria who are not sort of representative, then of course that's going to be problematic as well. And we could have an hour-long discussion easily just about that topic alone.
That's such a good point. Like, who's regulating, who's watching the watchmen, who's regulating the regulators, or making sure that it's actually ethical. I like to think of the question of responsibility here, in terms of consequences, right? There are certain types of AI that have large consequences if it goes poorly. I have a Tesla, and I had to. I'm a tech founder. I'm watching the audience roll their eyes right now at me. But I turn it on self-drive mode or autopilot when I'm on the highway, and the consequences of it performing very poorly on the highway are very high, right? Same with, not in Reboot RX's case, but in some cases of AI-generated drugs or other processes. We mentioned another one where consequences are very high if there's systemic bias pre-existing in the data, which is something like, creditworthiness. So it becomes, based on that, you can have consequences ranging from accidentally cruel, in the case of like chat bots that go off the rails, to high consequences. And everyone from, a product manager to a designer to the data scientist needs to be responsible for making sure that what they're building is both ethical and meeting their end users' goals. I would love to see in the chat or questions if you guys have more thoughts on that. But on to why we're the better stuff, the happier, greener pastures. There's some really cool stuff that AI can do for the world, and I'd love to dive into that. Laura, let's start with you again. We talked about Reboot RX, but where two things, re-explain to us how you guys are using data science more broadly in your company, and what are some of the more exciting trends of AI in the healthcare space that you're seeing?
Sure. So we're looking at different data types, but if we just focus on one, we're looking at published studies that have already been conducted where generic drugs, non-cancer generic drugs, have been tested for the treatment of cancer, either in the laboratory or in early clinical studies. And that's the data we're trying to gather and synthesize to make decisions about which are the most promising drugs to move forward with. So we need to sift through millions of published studies to find the thousands of studies that have already been conducted on these drugs. And there's no database of that. And more published studies are coming out all the time. So our work focuses on three main tasks. One is searching through all biomedical literature to find studies that are relevant, meaning studies where these non-cancer generic drugs were tested for the treatment of cancer, where a cancer-relevant phenotype or outcome was being measured. Then we want to automatically extract information from each of those studies, like what was the drug that was tested, what type of cancer was it tested for, and what was the effect of the drug on that cancer. And then we want to synthesize all of that data and basically generate a score that denotes how strong the evidence is across all studies that have been conducted that a particular drug for a particular cancer will provide benefit for patients. So those are different tasks where we have to try to automate the approach, because otherwise it would be impossible to do. So it would take years to manually sift through all of the data that might be relevant on these drugs and pull out all of the relevant information from those papers and studies to be able to understand what is the evidence that already exists.
This is such a good use case for data science. We talked about at the start of the session how executives sometimes just want to throw AI at something and maybe it's not needed. This is one of those cases where you have enormous amounts of data. As you said, that would take years to sift through as a human being, but a model can actually go through and find those for the benefit of cancer patients. What is that ultimate outcome for those patients that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, the outcome is figuring out which are the most promising treatments and then gathering the definitive evidence that they are effective for treating that type of cancer. So that would be, in most cases, running one large clinical trial, because smaller clinical trials have already been completed for cancer. So one large trial to prove that that drug is effective.
That's great.
So to your question, I think you asked what am I excited about going forward, or maybe what the challenges are. I can't remember. I'll wrap the two into one.
A little both. Yeah. What are you seeing in healthcare that you're excited about?
Well, particularly for what we're working on, one of the major limitations is the amount of training data that's required and the quality of the data to be able to train algorithms to do each of those steps of automation or semi-automation. So what we're excited about is the new machine learning approaches, like semi-supervised models that hopefully won't require such large training data sets to be able to generate these predictions that we're looking for. So hopefully over the next few years, those approaches will bear out and will help us make faster progress.
That's awesome. We've got, before we get into Q&A, we've got time for maybe just a couple more questions. John, I'd love to hear about your company, Gravyty, not to be confused with my company, Gravyty AI. You're in the nonprofit space. One, why is AI so important in the nonprofit space? And tell us about your company specifically and how you're using it.
Yeah, great question. So there's a lot of work that goes into raising money for nonprofits and, of course, other fundraising organizations. A lot of it is very personal work that a machine can't necessarily do. Even if with another 20 years of research, personal connection is really important, and it's often why people donate to organizations. And so our goal from the outset has always been not to replace fundraisers, not to automate away all of their work, but actually to free them up to engage with more personal connection by automating the work that they do at their desks that can be automated. So a couple examples are simply helping them to select donors that they should be reaching out to, over time on any given day, so that they don't have to sift through the data, potentially miss some donors, that they're making sure that they're promptly thanking donors who have given previously, maintaining relationships that need to be maintained over time, and asking for gifts at sort of the appropriate times, and asking for the right gift amounts. And then also just communicating in the right ways. So with a few simple weather APIs and things like geolocation, if a fundraiser likes to invite local donors to local events, during years when there's not a pandemic ongoing, they have to sort of look up that donor's file, look up their data, figure out if they either travel to, the organization's general location or live there. But if we can serve that data to them quickly, apply geolocation, detect sort of when certain events or recommendations are appropriate, then we can help those fundraisers sort of engage much more personally with those donors, without doing a lot of aggressive digging into the donor's personal information. We don't need to know everything about the donor to do these simple things. We just need to know, maybe generally where they live, or just what their sort of gift history is, to be able to really free up the fundraisers quite a bit.
Awesome. So you're using AI for hyper targeting, right? Very local hyper targeting, and then it sounds like you're also using it to generate messaging.
Yeah.
Is that true? So you're using NLP, an NLP model out there. I don't know what it, maybe something similar to like GPT-3 or something, to help create human-like text. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we actually have a pipeline that incorporates actually the BERT model. So has another transformer model, similar architecture in some ways. But we don't use it directly necessarily for complete novel word for word generation, because different fundraisers like to communicate in different ways. For some of them, it may be closer to mass mail, where they're essentially sending the same message almost word for word to every donor, just swapping out maybe a few words, maybe the introduction comments on the donor's weather. I hope, you're doing okay during this cold weather, or enjoying the warm weather, etc. And then other fundraisers, maybe sending a completely novel message to each donor, sort of conveying similar ideas, but using different phrasing, different wording. So we want to be able to pick up on that, and just generate something that's sort of reasonable, essentially, for those donors. If we just use GPT, any of the GPT versions, or BERT out of the box, and just sort of did word for word generation, those models don't necessarily really understand the world. They can't necessarily reason the way that humans can. In some cases, they can seem to, with lots and lots of data. But so what we do is sort of use them to try to capture some of the semantic features of different messaging, see how similar different messages are, so that we're recommending language that's appropriate for donors based on a few different demographic data points. But then not, sending to a lot of donors information that the fundraiser maybe just sent to one or two donors that was very unique to those donor situation.
Awesome. Laura had a question in chat about how this is AI versus maybe just advanced analytics, but I think you just touched on that. Laura, we can come back to that if we didn't in the Q&A session. We've got time for just 2 more questions before we jump into Q&A. We just heard from Laura about how AI is helping cancer patients potentially get the right drugs to cure cancer, or at least to help them, and in a more affordable way. John just talked through how they're using AI for advanced targeting and messaging for nonprofits, which, if anyone's ever been in a nonprofit, is a very difficult space. And obviously fundraising is super important. So being able to leverage that in an automatic way is important. Two great use cases. Marlaina, I'd like to wrap up with, kind of just a more broad, again, because you've got a good consultant lens on the industry, plus, your association with the groups. So what are some of the trends that we can anticipate around AI? And second kind of question, are there things that as individuals right now that we can help do to drive AI towards more social good?
Yeah, absolutely. Man, just thinking about that, there's so many trends when it comes to AI. But
well, we've got
some
a Q&A
trends-
session coming up, so we'll just one or two.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll just say one that's really big right now. Actually, one that's really interesting is the artificial intelligence Internet of Things, of where all internet connected devices, they learn from each other, they collect data. One good example, if we ever do go back to the office, is using a meeting that transcribed, that take all of your audio and put into word form, having that organized in a form of meeting minutes. Or even better, cybersecurity, the mother of all hacks happen. And right now, I see more and more projects where they're wanting to leverage AI that can spot and identify all the patterns and really want to spot fraud. How do we prevent access and cyber attacks? That is becoming more and more huge, and we are seeing a growing number of cybersecurity professionals. And pair that with artificial intelligence, that's huge. So what can individuals do? Just be engaged. That's the most important thing. Being engaged in the forums, understanding the problems, what's going on, what are the talks that's happening in each industry. The more that you are aware and that you know, and on top of that, you know more about AI, the technologies and the concepts, it becomes less hard to figure out how can we leverage this big thing, this AI, all these tools to help solve these problems and really help make a better future from an economic standpoint.
Fantastic. Well, you guys have all been absolutely wonderful. It's about 8 minutes to the hour, but I believe most of us agreed that we can stay on a few minutes past. I certainly can. If you do need to hop, by all means. We'll judge just by some of the questions that are popping up. I think we touched on this a little bit, but I think it's worth, getting back into just a little bit of the differences between AI and ML again. Can we maybe succinctly sum up how we might define the differences between those two things? I'll open up that to anyone.
I'd say just briefly in a couple words, I'd summarize it as essentially, I think of analytics as sort of extracting insights, and then AI would be really applying insights. So AI would often sort of incorporate analytics into action. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but sort of in the interest of time, that would be my summary.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I think the whole industry struggles a little bit between the two differences of those. I think machine learning, is a direct type of technique that is used that may or may not result in something that we would more broadly call AI. But machine learning is meant to take large data sets and dig into those data sets. I'm trying to do this as layman as possible with no crazy words. Dig into those data sets and then pull insights out of them or try to make decisions. AI can be more broadly, it doesn't have to be machine learning. It could be, as you pointed out, John, earlier, just like a straight linear regression model, which is just more like basic statistics. I want to get to one question in here that came from Lisa that's kind of dear to me, which is any ideas on how AI can fight climate change? I will post. I'll post this in the chat when I find it. I actually gave a TEDx talk on this. There's two very important things that are happening right now when it comes to AI and climate change. One is that we need to recognize that the development of AI is actually a mass contributor to carbon emissions. If nothing changes within the next 4 or 5 years, it's estimated that the training of an AI, training of an algorithm, actually is going to use up about 10% of the entire world's energy, roughly by 2025. We mentioned a model called GPT-3, which is a large language model. To create that model, released in the forms of energy that's being used at these data centers, released as much carbon, I forget, I'm going to make up the numbers, but it's something like this, as like 400 trips back and forth in a passenger plane between, you know, San Diego and London, something crazy. So we need to recognize first that it's actually contributing to the problem. However, there's some really, really exciting things that it can do, which is find, you know, much more energy efficient ways to you know, that a human would have a difficult time creating for things like solar panels. There's other ways that AI can actually create more efficiencies in the power grid so that we end up using on a whole less power. Anytime there's large data sets like that, AI can help us. But I'll open it up to the panelists as well. Any other thoughts on AI and climate change?
Well, I don't know a whole lot about this topic, but you also mentioned at the beginning auto ML and this whole idea around essentially using artificial intelligence to find the best AI algorithms or machine learning algorithms for a particular task, as well as maybe sort of finding the right weights, so the right ways to sort of parameterize those. And this is kind of a big area that's growing that will be applicable to a lot of things, I think, including climate change.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We have lots of questions in the Q&A right now about how we might, you know, start to learn AI. So I want to address those, and then I am going to get to at least 2 other questions. There's a question on the widening gap between larger companies that have resources and, you know, like nonprofits that don't necessarily have resources. You know, and what that means. I think this is around the topic of democratizing, you know, AI, as the field says. So I definitely want to get to that question. And then there's a couple other really good ones here. But first, let me open it up to all of you. You know, when we talk about learning AI, what are we actually talking about, and what types of resources could you recommend, or you know, programs, or you know, maybe talk a little bit about how you guys got your starts in data and more broadly just data and data science.
I can take this one for a person who recently got into AI, and this is the advice I give to everyone. Start with what you're passionate about. What is it that you like to do? Is it law? Is it IT? Is it project management? Start there. And then think about how can you leverage technology or AI to help close some of those gaps or to help benefit that particular industry. When you do that, then you can start getting engaged in organizations, taking online courses, or just, as I did, reach out to LinkedIn professionals who are already doing what you want to do. That's exactly where I started. I reached out on LinkedIn to VPs, professionals, product owners, project managers who was in a space, and I had a virtual coffee with them. I'm like, how can I get into AI? And when I didn't have a job at the moment, I took an online course. I will put a link in the chat. One of the best courses out there is on Udemy called Business Intelligence Analyst. It talks about the basics, the foundation of data before you can get started in artificial intelligence, and create the opportunity yourself. I founded the Minnesota Artificial Intelligence Network to give myself exposure, to connect with other people who are in AI and to learn about it. And now I can use that as leverage for more people who wanted to get into the industry. So as you learn about AI, build a portfolio, speak about it, talk about it. Then you will be able to establish yourself as the expert. And keyword, a lot of experts are still learning. They're still growing, they're still making mistakes. So you're right at the beginning of it. AI is still developing, is still growing, and what you know today can help somebody tomorrow.
I can go next, and I think I can address both of your questions at once, actually. So we are a small nonprofit startup. So related to your question about a nonprofit with limited resources, how do we build out the AI capabilities that we need? And one of the approaches that we take is through a lot of collaboration. We have collaborations with academics, we have collaborations with large corporations. But one of the projects that I'll mention, because it relates to your other question, is a project that we're doing right now with 50 data science volunteers around the world, people like those who might be listening here today. It's through a company called Omdena. And what they do is they organize these crowdsourced machine learning, AI, data science, whatever you want to call it, projects for social good. And we are running a project with them right now where we've asked these 50 data scientists, with all range of expertise, to help us solve a very specific natural language processing problem that we have in our pipeline. And it's been an incredible experience, and it's a really great opportunity for people to learn while they're working on a project will have some social good aspect to it. So in this project, there are very experienced data scientists, and there are those who don't have a lot of experience. And those people may take on other roles. So for example, they might help build training data sets that are needed to build machine learning models. But while they're doing that, they're working very collaboratively, and they're learning a lot about what others are developing and learning about new approaches. So it seems like a really fantastic opportunity for as a way to learn as well as contribute to society.
That's awesome. I love that approach too. Very, very cool. John, as a actual machine learning engineer, what kind of has been your journey to getting to the place that you're at?
So I actually started with an interest in linguistics going into my undergrad and never wrote my first line of code until sophomore year in college, 2015. But Brandeis, where I attended, had a program in computational linguistics. And so I got really interested in coding and in natural language processing, and then more broadly, machine learning sort of through that. And then discovered Gravyty, and so kind of continued working on that. And that's been pretty exciting. I didn't take a lot of general machine learning courses in my undergrad. I didn't have a lot of the advanced math that's really helpful for really digging into the algorithms and understanding them in depth, but I had enough to be able to work with the algorithms to sort of play around with them. And you mentioned the concept of democratizing AI. This is becoming sort of an even bigger thing. If you, I actually Googled that term right before this, and one of the companies that I've recently read about a little bit, H2O.ai, was one of the first results. There are other companies doing this, but essentially trying to make models available to people who don't necessarily have the advanced math or even a lot of the skills that you would need to sort of put an existing model into production yourself. They really provide the tools for people to be able to do that who are maybe general software engineers.
Yeah, that's this is not at all meant to be a pitch for my own company, but this is literally what we do. H2O is a great organization as well. I'll frame this in terms of like the shift that we're seeing in data science. So, we can say that we were in data science 1.0, which was characterized by the need for very talented data scientists. It was just larger organizations who had this talent. Data scientists get paid a lot. They're very expensive typically, and they're a limited resource. There's something like 500,000 open recs for data science right now. So, data science 1.0 was you have to have data scientists to do, AI and build data science. We're seeing a shift into the data science 2.0 movement, which really is around how can we get these types of tools and we'll call them models into the hands of maybe just general engineers or people that need them. My company is a marketplace for models for AI. So we have like data scientists who've built cool stuff. They upload them onto our platform, and our technology actually wraps them in what's called a container. That container then can be used by any junior engineer via a very simple API, or it has an interface on it that actually allows you to essentially just access it through a simple UI. And it's this shift into data science 2.0 that is really exciting for me, because we're going to start to see products and smaller organizations that haven't been able to access these types of capabilities, accessing them for the first time. Awesome. We are a few minutes past. Let's do this. I'd love to just maybe get a closing statement from you guys. There on some of our last kind of questions here. Let's do this. Can I get maybe just a last statement from you guys on what AI for good kind of means for you, and where you think that we touched on this a little bit, but where you think that people can start to get involved in those conversations. Let's Marlaina, let's start with you, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I was thinking that with technology, we tend to forget about the human, the people aspect of it. So when you think of AI for good, think about humanity. Like, how are we bettering people? And remember, with all decisions, all implementations, you have to put people first. And how you can get started with that, in every city, there's an organization that talks AI. There is a community organization. Go on meetup.com or download the app Meetup. Type in artificial intelligence. We're global now with the COVID. See what meetups out there are catered to artificial intelligence. Attend some of their events and really learn about what the talks are, what workshops are out there, and build a network and community around that.
Wonderful. Laura, any last closing thoughts?
I don't know that I have much that I haven't shared already, but
we've gotten pretty deep into some of this, and the program that you shared is just super cool. If people wanted to participate in the program that you shared, would you? I saw that you popped it into the chat. Would you mind resharing that in the chat one more time, and telling us what it's called again?
Yes, I'm Dana, and they run a new project around social good every week. I'm sure there have been climate change projects, by the way. If you want to just go look on their site, I'll send it on there. But I guess my last thought is, I may be biased, but I am excited about the opportunities to use AI within the nonprofit setting specifically. And I think it's exciting because the AI use cases within the nonprofit setting will be solely guided by maximizing the public good. And there are a lot of opportunities to build AI and get access to data sets that can be helpful to build AI within the nonprofit setting. So I encourage everybody to look for opportunities to get involved, either volunteering, because small nonprofits always are looking for volunteers, or perhaps your new full-time role in a nonprofit setting.
Awesome. John, over to you. Closing thoughts?
I'd really just love to echo what Marlaina said earlier about when getting started with AI or machine learning, start with what you're passionate about, start with what you're interested in, but also, you know, keep the human in AI. Don't try to disconnect sort of the work you're doing, uh, yeah, from people, from social issues, from ethics. Yeah.
Awesome. This is fantastic. I'll add in just a couple of my last little thoughts on places to go or ways to get involved in the community. I have a book. It's one of my favorites. Physicist, actually, Max Tegmark from MIT Media Lab wrote this really interesting book on what artificial intelligence is going to look like. It's called Life 3.0. Interesting read, just to get a little caught up on kind of where this is all heading and how to keep the human in AI. You can always go another really interesting place to find a community would be on Kaggle. It's actually a data science competition site. So you can up your data science skills there and learn about that. Learn about different types of projects that are out there, and even participate in some of those projects if you so choose. And I posted my LinkedIn, and if you guys are interested, I'm sure the panelists wouldn't mind. Feel free to reach out to us, and we'll get you involved in the communities that some of the ones that we mentioned. And I'm more than happy to spend some time answering questions that you all have as well, if you want to reach out to me individually. With that said, I want to thank GA a lot for hosting this. GA didn't ask me to thank them, but I love General Assembly, and I might be biased. I'm actually a faculty member. I teach product management to enterprise, but it's so good. And GA is a great place to learn about data science and Python, or product management and design, like I teach. And I obviously want to thank our very, very kick-ass panelists here with us. You guys are incredible for sharing your knowledge and insights and journeys. And the stuff that you're working on is just, it blows me away. So thank you all again.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. I just wanted to pop on here super quickly just to wrap up this session. I did post a link to a survey in the chat. Would really appreciate you guys taking a look at that before officially logging off and going about your days. But thank you all so much for tuning in with us. I hope you got some great takeaways, and a huge, huge thank you to all amazing speakers. We really, really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your days and sharing your insights. So thank you. All right.
Thanks for having us.
Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining us today.